Joining us on the line is Senator Rand Paul of Kentucky, elected to the U.S. Senate in 2010. From the very beginning, Dr. Paul has opposed the impeachment trial. He says it's unconstitutional and a sham and preventing bipartisan progress on a wide variety of issues. Senator Paul, thanks so much for joining the show. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
So why don't we start with what you think the actual agenda of this impeachment trial is? It's pretty obvious from the actual charge that was brought that there was no real intent for Democrats to actually provide the evidence for the charge. The actual charge is incitement to insurrection, which is a pretty specific charge. Do you think they've brought any evidence to that effect?
No. And in fact, if you ask them what the words were that were inciting, several of the House managers have said, well, his words are not really why we're impeaching him. I'm like, really? If you're not impeaching him for his words, what are you impeaching him for? But if you listen carefully, Cicilline, in his remarks 2 days ago, this is one of the House managers, comes forward and says, we are not impeaching for his words. And he goes on to say it's because he advocated for that the election was stolen. The problem with that logic is, well, one, it's ridiculous logic because if there is no incitement, there is no crime. But if advocating for a stolen election is a crime, the lead manager, Jamie Raskin, said the Trump election was stolen, and he voted not to seat the Florida electors. He voted to overturn the Trump election. So it's a ridiculous, specious argument. But they go on with a straight face. They have no sense of the hypocrisy that's involved in this.
And Senator Paul, it seems to me that they drew up this impeachment charge deliberately knowing that they wouldn't be able to actually get anybody from the other side of the aisle to vote for it. If they had drawn it up in say, more vague fashion or more openly political fashion, like abuse of power, or if they had suggested that it was just about President Trump telling untruths about the election and voter fraud, they might have been able to draw some Republicans. But the fact that they drew it as incitement, it says to me that they're really aiming at something else, and that is simply to lump in all Republicans with January 6th, regardless as to how Republicans generally feel about January 6th, which is that it was an act of criminality and evil.
Yeah, and the thing is, there's no sense of self-awareness on their part. And so I say, what are the words that President Trump spoke? And like I say, I've spoken out against January 6th. I voted against. I voted that the states should be allowed to certify the electors and Congress shouldn't overturn that. So I was on the other side of this debate. But when it comes to whether or not you're inciting violence, I've asked the question, look, Chuck Schumer stood in front of an angry mob in front of the Supreme Court and said, Kavanaugh, Gorsuch, you've unleashed a whirlwind and you're going to pay the price. You won't know what hit you if you keep making these awful decisions. That to me is very specific, very much inciting language, inflammatory, intemperate. And right after he spoke, a mob tried to break down the door of the Supreme Court. So the thing is how could they possibly say, oh, well, Trump did it, but Schumer didn't do it? Or Maxine Waters inciting violence, or Bernie Sanders supporters shooting up the ball field. There's so many examples of the Democrats inciting violence that if we're going to say speech, this is why it's important, because frankly, I don't think all of those Democrats are responsible for inciting violence. Their speech, you can't hold political speech to this standard that anybody who commits violence who follows a certain politician, that politician is responsible. And so it's a terribly low standard, but it'll destroy the country if this is the new standard that we're going to have.
And you personally, obviously, have been the victim of violence a couple of times based on people's political viewpoint. I've never heard you suggest that Bernie Sanders is responsible for the congressional baseball shooting or suggest that Democrats are responsible for a political actor trying to gravely physically harm you. Because the reality is that, as all of us in politics know, we all have millions of people who follow what we say. Some of those people are going to be nuts.
Right. And that's the thing is they showed us 10 hours of violent footage of what happened on January 6th. And it cements in my mind that people should be punished. The people who committed that violence should be punished, and without question. But the thing is the left wants to make this only about the right. And all summer long, not one Democrat piped up as our cities were burning. I heard one of the House managers say yesterday in his 20-hour speech, oh, and they had Molotov cocktails. Duh. Did you see the people all throughout the summer throwing Molotov cocktails into policemen's cars, into the courthouse, et cetera? So, no, they've been ignoring violence. And the other thing I've pointed out is with Kamala Harris. She's advocated for bailing out the violent protesters through this Minnesota Freedom Fund. One guy that's been bailed out, has been bailed out 3 times, has committed violence every time he gets out. And the last time he was bailed out by the fund that Kamala Harris supports, he cracked someone's head open and caused a brain injury. So the thing is it doesn't even pass the laugh test that they think, oh, this is all on one side and Democrats have never done it. If we use the same standard, every politician up here would probably go to jail.
Yeah, Senator Paul, one of the other things that folks have been talking about is President Trump's behavior during the riots, after the riots, sending tweets. There have been all these rumors that have been reported by the media that President Trump was not eager to send law enforcement, but Democrats did not call a single witness to this effect. They basically just reported the secondhand reporting of places like the New York Times without any verified sourcing that President Trump was sitting there chortling over all of this or actively impeding the sending of law enforcement. You would imagine they would actually have to prove a charge as inflammatory as that. It's a pretty inflammatory charge.
So I have no idea what he was thinking or doing during that day, but I do know that for 6 months while our cities burned, Democrats sat on their hands and they actually vocally opposed sending troops in there to calm the violence in the cities. And I had mixed feelings. I'm not really a big fan of having troops in our cities either, but really I came to the point finally with Homeland Security that there was some need to protect the federal buildings when the mayor of Portland and Seattle weren't doing that. But no Democrat supported that, and every Democrat spoke out against that. So it's the same thing. They're now saying Trump should have sent the national troops in an hour earlier. Well, what did they say for 6 months when there was talk of sending the National Guard into our cities? They either vocally opposed it or said nothing. So it's just double standard and hypocrisy. And I think that's what not only people on our side, but people in the middle will say, it's not really fair to use one standard for Republicans and another standard for Democrats.
Now, Senator Paul, one of the things that we've been watching, I think more and more these days, is Congress has become a vestigial organ of government. Every so often, you pass a giant omnibus package that casts all authority over to the executive branch, and then everybody goes on Twitter and Facebook and posts a bunch of inflammatory crap to gin up their voters. How does that get fixed? Because it's pretty obvious that that's exactly, like, Congress does not run the country anymore. They just sign checks at this point.
Yeah. And this has been going on for a while, and both parties are guilty of it, Republicans and Democrats. They don't pass individual appropriations bills. There's 12 departments of government, 12 different committees that are supposed to pass spending bills. They never do it. They glom them all together, and it comes out. The last one around Christmas time was 5,593 pages. No one could have possibly read it. But here's the dirty little secret of this. Both leadership in both parties love these deals. Because why, let's say you're in the Bitcoin business and you're worried about Bitcoin regulation and you want to ask me because I'm on the banking committee, you just bypass me and you go to just whoever's in leadership because nobody has any influence in the committee over regulatory, or you're in the dairy industry or you're a cattle farmer. None of the individual committees have any power. Only one person has the power. The top of the Republican food chain, the top of the Democrat food chain. So really, they won't say this out loud, but leadership loves these enormous bills because all the power flows to them. All the special interests give them money. And so millions of dollars change hands in a legal way to get little loopholes written into 1,000-page bills or 5,000-page bills. But what also gets written into there, and I remember around Christmas time, you watch the internet, everybody's like, $700 million for the Sudan? Why are we sending money to the Sudan? So there's all kinds of this aid that goes around the world. And I had an amendment on the Vote-A-Rama, the budget bill recently the Democrats put forward to say, why don't we take some of that foreign aid welfare and spend it on roads here at home? Only got 8 votes. But I think if you polled the American public, 75, 80% of people would say, why are we building roads in Pakistan? Why are we building roads in Afghanistan? Why don't we build those roads here at home? And I think that's an issue that actually President Trump and I were pretty closely aligned on.
And so, Senator Paul, obviously in sort of other news, the Biden administration is pushing forward a $1.9 trillion COVID quote-unquote relief package. It's obvious that this is, again, another boondoggle. It includes things like a $15 national minimum wage, which is insane considering that the actual median wage in places like Mississippi is actually below $15 an hour. So your minimum wage is now going to be higher than your actual median wage in places like Mississippi. The amount of spending that they're going to do is unprecedented. Obviously, it has been unprecedented over the course of the past year. Most economists suggest that we're looking at a $450 billion economic shortfall thanks to COVID in 2021. And so we're going to fill in a hole that's $450 billion with $1.9 trillion. What are the chances that this thing passes? And is there going to be any sort of bipartisanship to it at all?
It's going to pass solely with Democrat votes, and people need to know there is no rainy day fund up here. There is no savings account. I can't go over to the Federal Reserve and open this giant safe door. I say, aha, I found all the money. I'm going to pass free money out to everybody. And this is an area where I've disagreed with President Trump because President Trump was wanting to do these $2,000 checks. There is no money. We will destroy the foundation of our economy. We will ultimately destroy our currency. If you want to see what worthless paper monies look like, I've got a $3 trillion Zimbabwe note I'll give you. Germany made their currency so worthless that people would burn it for fuel. It can happen even to a great country. We cannot just spend money we don't have. And it doesn't need to be the alternative of $2,000 versus $600. It should be the other alternative is open the economy, let free people in a free society decide how they will protect themselves from this virus. I think taking a vaccine is a good idea, and I recommend people who are at risk definitely take the vaccine, but then that's your business. Like I said, I've had it, and could I get it again? Maybe, but I don't wear a mask because I don't want to wear a mask, and it's a free country. And so people ought to be able to make those decisions. The other thing about the masks, if you look at all the mandates, all the countries and all the states with the severest mandates, they actually have the highest incidence. There's no relationship at all between state mandates on behavior and incidence of or trajectory of the disease.
Now, Senator Rand Paul of Kentucky, thanks so much for joining the show. Really appreciate your insight as always, sir.
Can I say one more thing before we leave, Ben?
You bet.
Here it is. You guys have a great new author on Daily Wire who's really hot, and I'm a big fan of hers. My wife, so I don't know, she's not a regular columnist, but she had an article on the other day. So I'm proud of my wife. She and I wrote a book together, The Case Against Socialism, but she's also now had an article posted or an essay posted on Daily Wire.
Well, we are certainly proud of that, and we're excited to be associated with her. Senator Paul, thanks so much for the time.
Thanks.